to them, children of the night. What music they make. Hello, I'm Carla Laemmle. When my uncle, Carl Laemmle, founded Universal Pictures in 1915, one of the first properties he considered for production as a silent film was Bram Stoker's horror classic Dracula. 16 years later, when Universal finally produced the film, I had the privilege of speaking the first lines of dialogue in the first talking supernatural thriller.
Among the rugged peaks that frown down upon the Borgo Pass are found crumbling castles of a bygone age.
It was a very small part, but the fact that I still receive fan mail from all over the world is a wonderful testimonial to the film's status as an enduring classic. Join me now as we return to the fog-shrouded Borgo Pass and take a ride together along the road to Dracula.
And just as I was commencing to get drowsy, it seemed the whole room was filled with mist. And then I saw two red eyes staring at me, and a white, livid face came down out of the mist. I felt its breath on my face, and then its lips.
Why are we scared by something? Why are we aroused by something? I'm talking about sexually aroused. Because in the case of Dracula, very often the two responses overlap.
Dead. Undead. I don't care. They all frighten me.
Oh, I love to be frightened.
Do you?
Laugh all you like. I think he's fascinating.
Who wouldn't want to be like Dracula? You live forever, you don't work, you stay up all night.
Dracula is quite simply the most media-friendly fictional personality of the 20th century, if not all time. Even people who've never read the book or never seen the movie still know exactly who he is.
I am Dracula.
Count Dracula?
Dracula? Oh, what's he done to you, dear? Dracula is our vampire.
Dracula? I never even heard the name before.
Today, thanks to Universal Studios, everyone knows the name of Dracula. Although at first, my uncle, Carl Laemmle, had serious reservations about horror movies, Universal eventually filmed Bram Stoker's classic 3 times, first in Todd Browning's famous 1931 film starring Bela Lugosi. Next was the simultaneously produced Spanish-language version starring Lupita Tovar and Carlos Villarreal. Some people feel that this was the superior version from a technical standpoint, but you'll have to be the judge. And then came the romantic 1979 remake with Frank Langella. I can't imagine how my uncle, a very proper man, would have reacted to such a sexy Dracula. But speaking for myself, I would have given anything for a bit part in that production. The story of Dracula didn't begin at Universal City. As a fictional character, Dracula is more than 100 years old. First published in 1897, Bram Stoker's original novel has been frightening readers ever since. His centennial was recently celebrated in high style at events, exhibitions, and conventions all over the world. But perhaps the most revealing exhibition took place at the Rosenbach Library in Philadelphia, where novelist Bram Stoker's original working notes for Dracula were placed on public display for the first time.
What we have here at the Rosenbach are Stoker's working notes for Dracula. His earliest notes concern certain elements of plot. There are particular scenes in the novel that Stoker had imagined at its earliest stages that survive all the way to the end. A scene where Jonathan Harker, trapped in Dracula's castle, is preyed upon by 3 female vampires, who are then interrupted by Count Dracula barging into the room, saying, "This man is mine, I want him." This was one of Stoker's earliest ideas for Dracula.
Bram Stoker never visited Transylvania, but he was very well acquainted with the picturesque town of Whitby on the North Yorkshire coast, where a good deal of his novel takes place. Stoker often vacationed there and was most impressed with its ancient wind-blown cemetery and crumbling Gothic abbey.
Whitby is certainly a wonderful place for atmosphere. It would lend itself to a cinematic treatment if we could imagine Stoker thinking of that. Whitby as a popular port and as a popular sort of shipping port had its number of shipwrecks. And Stoker must have been fascinated with the idea of having a shipwreck in Dracula. So he used the shipwreck of a Russian schooner called Dmitri as a model for Dracula's arrival onto the English coast.
It was in Whitby that Stoker first came across the name of Dracula.
He discovered that there was this 15th century Transylvanian prince whose name was Dracula, also known as Vlad the Impaler due to a method of disposing of his enemies of which he was particularly fond. If you can see behind me, this is from a again, late 15th century woodcut showing Vlad at lunch with some of his victims behind him. Stoker was the first to take the legend of Vlad the Impaler, or Vlad Dracula, and attach it to the vampire. And they haven't really come apart since.
The historical Dracula didn't inspire Stoker to write the book. There's some confusion about this. He'd already outlined the novel when he came across the account of Vlad the Impaler and simply used it as a kind of window dressing or atmosphere.
Stoker's novel unfolds through letters, diaries, and journals. Count Dracula, a 500-year-old vampire, leaves his castle in Transylvania in search of new blood in a new country. Carrying the boxes of native soil in which he must rest during the hours of daylight, Dracula kills the entire crew of the ship that transports him to England. Two young women, Lucy and Mina, become his victims in turn. Dracula kills Lucy, transforming her into a foul thing of the night, an undead creature like himself. Soon, Mina falls under Dracula's spell and is terribly endangered. But thanks to a scientist wise enough to believe in the supernatural, the vampire is finally destroyed and Mina is released from her thrall.
Stoker drew on an already established tradition of the vampire in literature and in folklore, but did it in such a way that the legend really achieved a critical mass. Unlike the earlier fictional vampires, Stoker's Dracula was not a romantic character. He was a decrepit old man who became younger as he drank blood, but he never really became attractive.
He was writing a blood and thunder piece of, I suppose, what we would now call sort of exploitation. It's a first-rate 19th century trashy novel.
Above everything, Bram Stoker wanted his story dramatized. He may have been a bit of a frustrated playwright. Stoker's real career was managing London's prestigious Lyceum Theatre, and he knew exactly whom he wanted to play Dracula on stage. His employer, the great Victorian actor, Sir Henry Irving.
Well, Henry Irving has a lot to do with the character of Dracula. In the first place, a lot of the characters Henry Irving was most famous for playing could be considered to be Dracula-like characters. Roles like